Let's start today's presentation with today's quote. He who has health has hope, and he who has hope has everything. Today, I will be talking about two of the macronutrients that are carbohydrates and fat. I am Dr. Daud and doing my residency here under supervision of Professor Dr. Saira Afzal. Here's the pie chart of the three of the macronutrients, their distribution. I will be talking about two of them, that is carbohydrate and fat. Today's learning outline of this presentation will be introduction about the carbohydrates and fats, their function and types, and the recommended usage and problem which may be caused by their excess or their deficiencies. And by the end of presentation, we will be able to understand about the dietary importance of carbohydrates and fats. We'll know about the recommendation by World Health Organizations and the recent updates. Carbohydrates are the major components of most of the plants, and plants make carbohydrates on their own through photosynthesis. Carbohydrates are grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, and sugar, and we simply categorize them into two. That is a simple carbohydrate and the complex carbohydrates. The simple carbohydrates are further divided into two: single sugar and double sugar. That is monosaccharide and disaccharides. Monosaccharides are the building blocks of complex carbohydrates. Digestion converts all the carbohydrates to glucose eventually. The functions of carbohydrates are like they are the main source of energy for our body, and they spare the protein for being burned so it can be used to build and repair. The dietary fiber in the carbohydrates can help lower blood cholesterol. Carbohydrates are part of the connective tissues, some hormones and enzymes and genetic materials. Carbohydrates also help to digest protein and fat. And most importantly, the carbohydrate are the only fuel for central nervous system. In the monosaccharide categories, we see there are the three ones, the glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose is the main source of energy. Body converts other sugars into glucose for use by the body, and it is found in fruits and honey. While the fructose is sweetest natural sugar found in honey and fruit, and galactose not naturally found, but linked to glucose to make galactose. Uh, Disaccharides are the combinations of monosaccharides. Uh, Sucrose is the combination of glucose and fructose. Maltose is a combination of glucose, two molecules of glucose, and lactose, which is naturally in milk, is the combination of glucose and galactose. The complex carbohydrate, these are the polysaccharides. Their origin may be from animal or plants. There are two types of polysaccharides: starch, which are the complex carbohydrates, and the fiber, like cellulose, gums, hemicellulose, or pectin. Starch are made up of glucose linked together. These are found only in plants and found in grains like wheat, corn, rice, rye, barley, and oats. And the starch thickens liquids when heated. That is called gelatinization. The fate of the glucose is like this. By the glycolysis, they produce cell energy. The glucose is stored in the form of glycogen in muscles and liver. Glucose is converted to fat for energy storage, and in carbon skeleton for synthesis of non-essential amino acids are also derived from the glucose. The fiber part of the starch, this may be, these are edible but not digestible. The fibers move through the body unchanged. There are usually two types, which number one, which swell in the water, these are soluble, and which doesn't swell in the water, they are insoluble. They are found in dried bean, peas, lentils, and also found in peeling of fruits and vegetables. Here you can see the fiber part, the wheat kernel has the three parts: endosperm, bran, and germ. Endosperm form the major part of the fiber, that is 83%, and while the bran making 14%, and the germ form the 3% of the fiber. The way to get the more fiber is have to eat more fruits and vegetable, and the whole grain food have to eat if we want to get the more fiber. Dietary recommendation about the fibers and carbohydrate is like 130 grams of each day for children and adult. Women need at least 30 grams of carbohydrate from a fiber a day. Men need at least 25 grams of carbohydrate from a fiber a day. And most importantly, 45 to 65% of fat should come from the carbohydrate. If we eat more carbohydrate than our need, the extra is stored in the liver or in the tissue as a fat. Consumption of low fiber processed starch stimulates overproduction of insulin, which increases triglycerides and fat synthesis. Carbohydrates yield 4 kilocalories per gram, that is 17 kilojoules. A few words about glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Glycogenolysis is like in the liver, glycogen is converted into glucose, while in muscles, glycogen is converted into muscle glucose, and that gives energy. Gluconeogenesis is formation of glucose from the amino acids. Now the glycemic index. The glycemic index is basically a measure of how quickly a food causes our blood sugar level to rise. This measure ranks food on a scale of 0 to 100. Food which have high glycemic index are quickly digested and absorbed and cause a rapid rise in blood sugar. While the low glycemic foods, they pass through our intestine slowly, and they slow the digestion rate. The term glycemic load, it is that quantifies overall glycemic effect of a portion of a food. Here is the chart of the various food items which have different glycemic index. You see in descending order from low to high, the grains or starch, the rice, brown cereals, spaghetti, corn sweet, wild rice, and you see they are increasing glycemic index like this, and so on, that like the vegetables, fruits, dairy, and the proteins, the glycemic index is there, that is used as a reference value. Lower the glycemic index, more beneficial for it, that because they slowly release the sugar and doesn't cause the blood sugar to rise rapidly. Here is another slide of glycemic index like this, that the low and high index versus high glycemic index versus low glycemic index. The foods which have low glycemic index are better than those with high glycemic index. And you see the foods in the high glycemic index are chips, biscuit, cakes, ice creams, dates, jasmine rice, potatoes, processed food, watermelon also included in the high glycemic index, as it quickly releases, the sugar in the blood, and white bread is also in high glycemic index. While low glycemic index like basmati rice, vegetable, lentils, pasta, whole grain breads, oats, and oranges are labeled as low glycemic index. In a balanced diet, as you know, the protein proportion, last year we learned about 10 to 15% of daily diet should come from the protein, while the fat constituent should not be more than 15 to 30% of daily energy, while carbohydrate should constitute the remaining part of the food, that is 45 to 65%. In a balance, the imbalance of carbohydrate may cause a number of problems like diabetes, hypoglycemia, starvation, And lactose intolerance, in diabetes, after food intake, blood glucose rises and is not regulated because insulin is inadequate. Hypoglycemia, blood sugar drops dramatically due to too much insulin, or maybe due to more activity or inadequate food intake, or maybe due to illness. While starvation, if one is not taking enough carbohydrate, inadequate supply of carbohydrate, ketone bodies are formed, and they are the alternate source of energy. Excessive ketones may lead to the ketosis. While lactose intolerance is the problem, those who people are allergic to lactose, the intestinal uh, bacteria feed on undigested lactose, produce acid and gas, and lactose molecules attract water, and they cause floating abdominal discomfort and diarrhea. Now comes about the other macro constituent, that is fat or lipid. These are the body's main form of long-term energy storage. Large molecules made up of fatty acids and glycerol. Fatty acids are long chain of carbon atoms attached to the hydrogen atoms. Uses, they yield energy, 9 kilocalories per gram as compared to 4 kilocalories per gram to carbohydrate. It's a major source of energy. Like they give insulation beneath the skin, and they support and padding for the organisms and organs. They give the integrity of the cell membrane and carry fat-soluble vitamins. They are, most importantly, the precursor of prostaglandins. The vascular hemostasis is maintained through this, and they make the food more palatable. Classification of fat or lipids is like this: the simple lipids, compound or derived lipids. Simple lipid triglycerides, uh, the major class of dietary lipid in adipose tissue, like coconut oil, palm oil, cotton seed, butter, margarine. While the compound lipids are the minor portion of lipid in diet, like lecithin is the most common and important part of the cell membrane. While the derived lipid also got sterols, example is cholesterol, and these are the part of sex hormones and vitamin D. Yeah. The other classification of fats may be categorized as saturated or unsaturated. Saturated fats like lauric acid, palmate, stearic acid. There is in saturated fat no double bond between the carbon items and solid at room temperature. And these are usually animal origin: ghee, butter, cheese, meat, and fish are the examples. And the saturated fat cause obesity, high cholesterol level, and increased risk of heart diseases, while unsaturated fat have double bond between two carbon atoms, and they are usually liquid at room temperature. And the example is vegetable oil. Essential fatty acids. Uh, like essential amino acid, there are few two essential fatty acids are also there, which cannot be synthesized in the body. They can only be derived from the food. Two fatty acids are essentials, that is linoleic acid and linolenic acid and linoleic acid. Omega-3 fatty acid and omega-6 fatty acids. Essential amino acid deficiency may lead to phrenoderma, that is taut skin, and in this problem, it's characterized by a rough skin-like eruption on the back and the side of the arms and the legs, back and buttocks, and it can be cured by giving linseed of safflower oil, which are rich in essential fatty acids. Safflower oil is richest source of linoleic acid and most important essential fatty acid. Flaxseed is the richest source of linolenic acid. You know, the safflower is the saffron and flaxseed is the alsi in our language. Hydration, the hydration makes hydrogenation, hydrogenation make the vegetable oil, converts vegetable oil into vanaspati ghee, and under the cattle catalyst is converted into semi-solid form. It keeps the quality, but essential fatty acid content is reduced drastically. Here is the ideal healthy levels of the total cholesterols, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. You know, the total cholesterol normal level should be less than 200 milligram per deciliter. LDL should be less than 100 milligram per deciliter, and HDL, most importantly, they must be greater or equal to 60 milligram per deciliter, and triglyceride less than 150 milligram per deciliter. Raised low density lipoprotein and lowered high density lipoprotein effects. What they cause is they make the arteries more rigid, they cause clogging of arteries, they create insulin resistance, which contribute to diabetes mellitus, and they significantly increase the chances of heart rate. So ideally, the cholesterol and high density lipoprotein ratio should be less than 3.5, and a reduction of fat intake should be less than 20 to 30 milligram, 30% of the total energy intake. That's important. And the consumption of saturated fat must be less than 10% of total energy intake. The health effects of the fat, fat or lipids, they cause obesity, as you will learn, phrenoderma, towards skin due to deficiency, and the coronary heart diseases like atherosclerosis, cholesterol, low density lipoprotein ratio increases more than 40% of energy supply from saturated fat, and they may cause cancer of colon and breast. World Health Organization has recommended that energy intake should be in balance with the energy expenditure. To avoid unhealthy weight gain, total fat should not exceed 30% of total energy. The intake of saturated fat should be less than 10% of total energy intake, and intake of trans fats less than 1% of energy intake, which is shift in fat consumption away from saturated fats and trans fats to unsaturated fats, and towards the goal of eliminating industrially produced trans fats. WHO also recommends that to limit the intake of free sugar to less than 10% of total energy intake should be the part of the healthy life. A further reduction to less than 5% of total energy intake is suggested for additional health benefits. Here's the recent evidence from an article. It shows the bioactive compounds in edible oils and their roles in oxidative stress inflammation. The available evidence indicates that the consumption of long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acid and monounsaturated fatty acids and polyphenols from edible oils, they correlate to decreased level of oxidative stress and inflammation. That's all about it. These are my references. And now it's the time for MCQs. The first MCQ, the percentage of total calories obtained from carbohydrate should be between
20 to 35.
Carbohydrate should be constitution like 50 to 65. Carbohydrate should constitute like 50 to 65, and you know the fat 20 to 30%, and the protein up to 15%. The starch is an example of mono-oligos, di or
polysaccharide.
Polysaccharide. That's correct. The highest percentage of polyunsaturated fatty acid is present in which one of these? Polyunsaturated, the healthy diet.
Margarine.
Okay.
B.
Is a soybean. That's correct. The soybean is the the richest source of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Which one of the following is a cardioprotective fatty acid?
C.
That's it.
C.
Omega 3 fatty acid is a cardioprotective. That's correct. The highest content of saturated fatty acid is in, that is now the saturated fatty acid.
Butter.
C.
It's a
B.
it's a coconut oil which has got the highest saturated fatty acid. A diet high in saturated fat can be linked to which of the followings?
Cardiovascular diseases.
Cardiovascular diseases. That's correct. Nutrition is derived by cows, cattle, goats, and sheep from
Cellulose.
A.
yes, cellulose. They have got the enzyme that is cellulase, which is deficient in human, and we cannot derive energy from cellulase. That's the correct answer. If the lipid is liquefied at room temperature, it is called.
Oil.
That's all. That's correct. A man weighing 68 kg consumes 325 gram of carbohydrates, 65 gram of protein, and 35 gram of fat in his diet. The most applicable statement in this case is
B.
B.
yes, that's correct. The proportion of protein, fat, and carbohydrate is in a good proportion. That's the correct answer. Following dietary changes are advised to reduce the prevalence of coronary heart disease, except which one is not correct?
A.
A.
WHO recommendations, as you know, have gone through that saturated fat intake should be less than 10%. It should not be 20%. That is saturated fat should be less than 10% of total energy. That's the incorrect statement here, while the rest are the correct one. The salt intake should be less than 5. Fat intake should be 20 to 30%, but the saturated fat should be less than 10%. That's the key of my MCQs, and thank you. Any question?
No, sir. Thank you.